I was definitely in a place in my life where, I was looking to settle down, but I wasn't like consciously looking for my husband by signing up for Match.com.
I think when I started online dating, my goals were to date as well. Because I was working a lot and because of my location, I wasn't going on too many dates. So I kind of jumped into this going, well, here's an opportunity to me to get out, meet a lot of girls, and just have fun with it.
I mean, it was fun. I was living with roommates, and you'd get all these emails, and we would actually sit down sometimes together, and we would just laugh and have fun. And then it wasn't until I actually went on my first date, which actually ended up being a good experience, that I was thinking, this, it's not crazy people out there, and there are normal people, and this can work.
A phenomenon of the world we live in, meeting potential dates online, a pursuit that attracts millions of people of all age groups.
You hear it on the news all the time about how people are using the internet for a variety of things, and dating is no exception. With all the services that are out there, there's like Match.com or eHarmony, things like MySpace, Friendster. These are all avenues now where the contemporary dater who maybe doesn't have the time or availability to go out and date can use these services on the internet.
From a guy's standpoint is that, you automatically know if the girl is single and looking. You don't know that at a bar. You know who has got kids or who has been married, or maybe their profession or things like that. If they don't have a profession, if they're in school, or if they're in between jobs, and a smoker, and they got cats. I'm allergic to cats.
Meeting people outside your particular area. So, for example, Stephen was in Burbank, and I live here in Hermosa. So if it weren't for Match, I don't think our paths ever would have crossed in life. So that was a definite advantage. Disadvantages, I guess, again, would just be a concern about, whether someone is presenting a true character of who they are.
I had a date with this one girl, and she contacted me, and this Brazilian, young, pretty little thing, and this nice dress and everything, and I was like, wow, and she came after me, and she called me, and she's just like, let's go to a date, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be fantastic, and I walk in the Starbucks, and I walk out of the Starbucks, I walk back in and out, I can't find her, and she's like, Steven, and she's sitting down, and it was not the person. It was not. She was 30 pounds heavier. I couldn't even tell. She had so much makeup on that she did not look like the person in her photo. And I'm like, well, maybe she's got a great personality. She was a terrible person. Should not be dating. And I couldn't get out of that place fast enough.
Good experiences are bad. The desire to make connections, to date and form relationships, is vital to human existence.
Generally from 18 to 25, let's say we're kind of in that dating mode. It's a developmental thing. Most males and females are interested in it by that time.
It's an opportunity to do something that is a sign of growing up and maturing. And so going out with another person is a sign of that maturation and a person's development and growing up.
Certainly, friendships become deeper and much more adult-like in nature. We see the onset of romantic relationships during adolescence, and a really important challenge during the adolescent years is the challenge to be able to integrate feelings of closeness, emotional closeness, with feelings of sexual attraction and sexual intimacy.
that's just a huge source of conflict in relationships because, you know, high school kids may be dating and the boy's thinking, gee, it'd be fun to have sex, and the girl's thinking, I don't love him, I haven't known him long enough. To this kind of misunderstanding about when sex is appropriate, when it feels okay to both parties.
Admittedly, the process of dating serves an array of functions and purposes.
For some people, dating is just dating. It's a recreation. I'm dating because I want to get out, I want to have fun, I want to enjoy myself.
To really get to know another person, to find out what they're like, what their interests are, and to feel a sense of close connection with another person.
I think still for the majority of people, dating is a goal-directed activity. Dating is, I'm dating because I want to find a mate. Dating and mating, I want to find someone to build a life with, whether that's a marriage, a partnership, cohabitation, whatever it might be. So the agendas are different in terms of that, and the focus needs to be different.
One of the things that can really complicate dating is when there's a mismatch of the purposes and goals of dating. There can be one person who is really looking to have fun with another person and just doing something that they can enjoy doing together, and another person is looking to use dating as an opportunity to assess the likelihood that this is a long-term relationship.
At our first lunch, we had lunch at the Cheesecake Factory, and that went really well. And the whole time I was pretty impressed. I definitely, there was definitely a wow factor when Lisa walked in. And so sitting through lunch, for me, it was like, I want to ask her out. I want to go to the next date.
I went in with pretty low expectations, not based on his pictures, but the whole us getting to that first date, he had canceled 3 times. So that date almost never happened after the second time. But then it was, he didn't seem like a flaky, irresponsible person when we spoke and through what I knew. So it was like, let's, third time's a charm, right? So I kind of went into it with just whatever happens, happens.
The only thing going on in my head is like, I wonder if she'll go out with me again. So I really don't remember a lot of the conversation of our first date because I was so like, just hoping I can go out with her again. So
don't mess this up.
Yeah, don't mess this up. So then at the end of the date, asked her out again. She said sure, and I knew from the conversations that we both like sushi. So the first real date was like off to sushi.
I probably kept him a little arm's distance away for a number of months, but that was part of me knowing that if I was going to make a commitment to someone, I wanted to make sure it was the one, which puts all of a sudden a lot of pressure because it's like, how do you know if it's the one if you're not totally opening yourself up completely emotionally?
The next thing was the Valentine's. I go, well, if I get Valentine's, I know I'm top of the list, even if she's dating. So I asked her, would you like to go out with me, have a date for Valentine's? And she was like, I might be out of town for my birthday. And I'm like, oh, So that's pretty much how we left it, although her birthday is 2 days after Valentine's, so it was somewhat legit.
And usually a long weekend. But he took me off guard. It was kind of in advance, so I wasn't even expecting it. And I think at the time I was dating, had been on a couple of dates with someone prior. So I just wasn't sure. So I didn't know what to say, but we went.
Waiting for a better offer.
No, but we went.
We went.
In contrast to the way they met, Stephen and Lisa's dating patterns reflect some aspects of traditional dating.
It was often up to the guy to decide what was going to happen. He would have to plan it in advance. He would invite the girl in advance. He would sometimes go and meet the parents in advance. And then they would have an opportunity to get to know him. And then they would go out on their date, and the guy would pay for the date. And then when they would come back at the prescribed time for the curfew. And so the rules for dating were much more clear, and the roles, the male-female roles, were much more clearly defined.
you jump forward 40 years and the roles are not as clear as to who initiates any kind of dating. There's also a sense now, I think, more of just kind of group dating and just kind of hanging out that we saw perhaps maybe less of 30, 40 years ago. There's a positive of that group dating in that there's less pressure sometimes to have a date. You can just kind of go out and hang out with your friends.
They can have a sense of companionship with a group. They can use it for purposes of socialization, and by that I mean to learn how to interact with somebody of the opposite sex. So they can accomplish several of those same purposes, but in more of a group context rather than just an individual couple context.
One of the challenges of traditional dating was its emphasis on pursuing relationships with long-term potential. Not so today.
There was a sense that you got married after college or after high school and you started your life then. With many of these students, they say, well, I want to travel around the world, or I want to get my career under my belt, or I wanted to go to grad school and I want to delay marriage. So they're really not interested in having serious long-term relationships at 18, 20, 21 because they don't see themselves getting married until 28 or 29.
Where do people commonly meet once they're ready for a more serious relationship?
In the neighborhood where they grow up, the schools that they attend, where they work. And so these natural sort of social systems is the primary way in which people meet each other. But once people get out of college, it can be more difficult to find a pool of eligibles. And at those times, they will look for other means, like using personal ads, using the internet, using dating services. Now there's something called speed dating, where people will get together in a room with a group of other people who are also interested in dating, and they'll spend a limited number of time with each person. And so this is an opportunity that some people utilize to expand their natural support network.
When it comes to actually selecting someone to date, the scenario becomes even more interesting.
I probably dated 60 girls before Lisa, and I'd say probably only a few of those kind of turned into something more than just a coffee date. In a few minutes, you're gonna know if you want to at least go to the next date. And there was a couple of girls that I dated for a few weeks, maybe a month or so. After having those dates, I decided, it's time to meet somebody I really want to spend some time with.
Most people would probably believe that they have the freedom to choose anybody that they want to as a potential partner or mate, someone to date. And so there is some freedom, but there's usually freedom within a certain amount of limits, some of which most of us do not even realize.
Freedom might be taken away from them because of the restrictions of their belief in a particular religion or faith. For instance, I will not date outside of my religion. So maybe there's somebody I've met and they're really nice and I think I could click with them, but I don't have the freedom to date them because they're not my religion. That could also apply to culture.
And each culture kind of defines for an individual what would be an acceptable choice within that particular culture.
Because I saw her for the first time and I said, wow, she looked cute. And then actually when her brother went to the United States and we come to the airport to welcome him at the airport and see there too, so I there talked to her.
But at that time I cannot go out like later than 8 o'clock in the evening. Whenever I go, I had to let my parents know that, and after 8 o'clock in the evening, I had to be home.
Even though at the time, Holly is 30 years old, a college graduate, and a teacher.
It's not dependent on age. In my country, that every single girl had to do that. If I marry, that's okay. But that time I was still single. I had to listen to my parents. Now I can go out later than 8 o'clock in the evening, but that time I cannot.
And so while we feel the freedom to choose a number of people, people tend to date other people that are at relatively the same age that they are, at a fairly similar level of social class or education. And there's also a tendency to date other people who are of the same race or ethnicity, and also at times of the same religion.
what we call homogamy. It's kind of the birds of a feather flock together type of theory, where we tend to ultimately gravitate to people who are like us and should be to a certain degree. They're maybe within our same value system, maybe our same educational level, maybe our same type of family background. Those are things that we're alike enough to where it makes the relationship a possibility of success.
People will say to me, what about the statement, differences or opposites attract? And I say, yeah, they do. Opposites attract, and then they attack. And it's not long until you have to deal with the fact that this person thinks differently than you do. You've got to negotiate all those differences, and you've got to reach compromise. And sometimes that's a pretty hard thing to do.
There are other constraints as well. One potential obstacle is what social scientists call propinquity.
And propinquity simply means we date somebody that we're near, we know. I mean, you might say, of course. But we talk about this, especially when we talk to parents about if they can influence the dating process or not, which in America, not much. But they can through what we call propinquity, which means they put their children in an environment that they think is a good chance for them to meet someone that they might approve of.
What often attracts one person to another, at least initially, is their physical appearance.
A person needs to feel attracted to another individual, and often that is some form of physical attraction, though there can also be emotional attraction as well.
Whoa, I'm so turned on to her. Whoa, I think he is such a hunk. I mean, they use that. And so you just want to hold that person and all that. But, you know, over time, chemistry will let you down a lot if you don't have the underlying compatibility underneath it.
And then they're stuck with someone that later they're not very happy with. And so then that's a real problem. So we encourage people in the dating process to be who you are.
I was definitely looking for a certain quality of person, and I wasn't just going to go out and find a date for a Saturday or Friday night just to be out. You know, I'd rather be at home watching a movie than out on a terrible date.
It's not only dating protocols that have changed in recent years. The values that shape the choice of a mate appear to be shifting as well. In the 1990s, David Buss and an international team of collaborators surveyed the mating preferences of over 10,000 people in 37 countries. The characteristics that top the list support the idea of dating and mating as a social exchange.
It is true that in general, women indicate a preference for what you might call status and resources, you know, the ability of the man to be a provider, and men have more interest in, actually in homemaker qualities, a woman who could actually be a good nurturer and good at managing the home front, and that women seek older mates and men seek younger mates in relation to themselves.
Today, in some countries, the mate selection process reflects a more egalitarian approach, as Dr. Eagly discovered in the follow-up studies she conducted.
Actually reanalyzing data that David Buss had originally collected in relation to the status of women. The United Nations has data on the status of women. What we found is that as women and men become more equal, as we look across the cultures, their ways of selecting mates tend to converge. So women don't need that older man with lots of resources if they themselves are going to have reasonable careers and make money. They can then seek someone more like themselves and somebody of their own age. And similarly, if men don't want to have a homemaker, they don't have to find that, you know, younger person who's willing to take the deal and whom they could sort of dominate in some sense. So we found that those mate selection preferences tend to erode.
Still, culture can play a major role in the selection of a mate who is considered acceptable.
I'm Mexican clan, born into folded arm people. That's the first thing we ask one another, you know, what is your clan?
I was half Sac and Fox and half Sioux. I met Bernita at a revival one evening and really started liking her.
It was during Christmas, around Christmas time, or Thanksgiving time. We started doing things together. He started coming over to the house. We started a choir where the kids, work together. And
Navajo system has a clan system. And one of the things that you want to make sure that you never marry one of your relatives. There are some major clans, and so Bernita has told me that the reason why she's glad that she married me, she knows definitely that she has not married one of her relatives.
What we were always told is that if you do mix your blood with your same family line, then your child, the child that's being born, is going to suffer the consequences.
So I got married actually to Bernita without even kissing her yet. So I got to like her and then got married that way in the Navajo traditional way.
Nearly all people, despite cultural differences, place mutual attraction and love near the top of their list of qualities they are seeking in a date or mate. Timing may also play a role.
Well, you're the right person, but it's not the right time for me. I'm involved with somebody else, or my head's somewhere else, so now it's not a good time.
Our past influences our choices, maybe past experiences we've had that make us open to a possibility or not. I think part of it, again, is our backgrounds, our past, our parents, our own feeling about ourselves and our own self-worth, and the reality of what we're able to say, this is my goal in life, this is what I want out of life, and I'm willing to wait.
Not all relationships work out, nor, most would agree, should they.
There are a number of things that can lead up to the breakup of a relationship. One of those is that a person realizes that maybe we don't have so much in common after all. That at the beginning, this was somebody that I could have some fun with, but the more I've gotten to know the person, I realize that we don't have as much in common, or that we have a difference in our values.
I might like him, but I don't really respect him that much, and I think respect is vital to a long-lasting marriage. Sometimes they're getting pressure from other people, and that may influence the breakup in a good way or a bad way.
I think the number one reason that relationships end, though, has to do with communication. In my work as a therapist, I can't think of any couple that's come in where communication has not been an issue. It seems as if the couple, they just stopped trying. And for whatever reason, they've gotten so comfortable with each other, they choose not to express their feelings, their wants, their desires. And when the communication goes in the relationship goes as a whole.
You about done giving me a third degree?
The breakup of a long-term relationship is usually painful for both parties.
Easiest breakups are when they're mutual, of course. If they just decide together to be really honest with each other and say, you're a great guy, but I don't think you're for me, and he maybe agrees, and that's maybe the easiest way. The hardest, of course, is when one doesn't want to and the other one does.
There's a term called the principle of least interest, and the principle of least interest says that the person who has the least amount of interest in a relationship is going to be the one in the more powerful position and probably less devastated by the breakup.
But generally, my belief is the way we end a relationship really informs how we begin the next one. If I end on a good foot, on a healthy foot, on an honest foot, then after I've gone through a suitable mourning period, whatever that might be, I'm able to start, fresh. I'm able to start with an open heart and try and learn from my past relationships and bring that into it. If I end in a more painful way, in a blaming way, in a finger-pointing way, it's your fault, you were bad, it's going to make it more challenging for me to open up and be available in the next relationship and not just recreate that same drama.
What about relationships that do stand the test of time? Do they have qualities or traits that set them apart?
Number one, I think, is commitment, having a long-term view of a relationship,
where a person is committed to the partner as well as to the relationship. Second important ingredient is companionship, that this is somebody that I enjoy being with, our personalities mesh, we enjoy spending time together, and so there's that sense of companionship.
and communication. How do I listen well, and how do I speak in such a way that someone is able to listen to me?
They have the freedom to express themselves in a constructive way. They can also listen to understand where the other person is coming from. One thing that's sometimes a surprise to people is that an important ingredient of a long-term successful relationship is the ability to manage conflict and change and adversity.
You're going to have conflict in any kind of relationship. But learning this skill of, okay, you're different, I'm different, how can we manage those differences in a way that lead to intimacy?
Conflict may not be the only challenge couples face. Lisa, admittedly, found it difficult to let down her guard.
We should probably just set that up.
It was in April. We met in January. My dad, I'm gonna cry. My dad had a heart attack. And I was driving to the hospital, and one of the things that I realized upset me a lot was that he hadn't met Stephen yet. And I know, my dad has 4 girls, and I think it's married, my parents are still married, and that's very important. And just him having that information, and he ended up being fine. And, but that to me was a big signal, like, wow, this Stephen guy might be something important. He met my parents right after that. And then I think the following month we had our first trip away together up in our cabin up in Lake Arrowhead.
We just had such a blast that week, and it really kind of and we both had our guards down and really just kind of showed our true selves, and it really just kind of put everything into place.
And then, we say that that's when I think he was in my heart to stay.
There wasn't a weekend that went by that we did not hook up and do something. So I think it just progressed and kept getting better and better and better, and still is.
Ourfamilies Ourselves is an 18-part series about marriages and families. For information on this program and accompanying materials, call 1-800-576-2988 or visit us online